he even put the machine gun mount on the roof, so you could stand up on the passenger side and he could drive it down the high street.
Hello everyone and welcome again to our 7-Spot channel. We've got something really different for you today. There's a lot of people that have been involved in the kit car world for a long time. Some publishing, some building their own cars, and some coming up with their own unique designs and bringing them to market. Today we're going to talk to somebody who's done all three of those. Chris Hollier is in the studio today with us at 7-Spot for Kit Car Chat. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you, Trevor. Good morning.
How are you today?
Yeah, doing well, thank you. Bit of a dreary day outside, but it's nice and warm and cosy in here.
Well, whereabouts in the world are you?
I'm in a little village called Stoke Ferry in West Norfolk. Lovely little place, right out in the middle of nowhere. I moved here from West London about 33 years ago, so I'd have some workshop space because I couldn't afford anything down in London. Whereas here, I got 5 acres for the price of a 1-bedroom flat in London.
I can believe it. So, West London, is that where you grew up?
Yes, I was originally from Northolt in West London. It's London. It has its own unique charm, but not one that I'm particularly endeared with anymore. I go back down there very occasionally for work now, and I can't wait to escape the place and come back up here where I've got some space and some peace and quiet.
When you came out of school clutching your exam results, what were your hopes and thoughts with your career?
Well, I knew I wanted to get into motor cars somewhere, and I was accepted to do an apprenticeship with the Metropolitan Police in London. And I did a 5-year fully indentured apprenticeship with them, working on police cars. And when that was finally up, I went out into the big wide world and worked for a couple of smaller companies for a few years, but I was never particularly happy doing it because they just wanted me doing humdrum work. So I went self-employed by the time I was about 21, I think, somewhere around about there. And excuse me, and enjoyed the whole self-employed thing so much more because I could do what I wanted, make the decisions I wanted to do. And a lot of it at the time, because this was early 80s, was welding up rusty MGBs and Minis and Escorts because it paid the bills. You know, it was just something to do.
But you moved on from that and ended up getting involved in the world of kit cars. How did that come about?
Yeah, during the early part of the 1980s, I became aware of the kit industry, and I went to a couple of shows with a few pals, and we came across NGs at one of the shows, and we were very impressed with the quality of the fiberglass. It looked like a really nice car, and we made an appointment to go down to the factory in the New Forest and met Nick Green, and he took us for a ride in the TCR and scared the life out of the pair of us, which was the best sales technique he could ever have used. And that, for people who don't remember it, the TCR was the NGTC V8 that Nick made to go racing in the 750 Motor Club series. And it was quite a healthy 3.9 engine. That was a quick car. And the thing about NGs is they're not a very big car. Now, I'm a big fella, I'm 6'2". Nick was about 6 foot as well. So with the two of us shoved inside this TCR, bashing around the lanes of Hampshire, it was cosy and exciting at the same time. And we didn't actually order a kit at the time while we were at the show, but came back, was discussing it for about a week. And this was in the era of Exchange and Mart, which used to be the Bible for anybody who was into cars of any description. And we found a guy up in the Midlands who was a coal mining engineer that had bought a kit from the factory. He'd found the engine and gearbox, he'd refurbished all the MGB suspension, and he'd got everything ready. He was just about to start on the major part of the build, and he got made redundant, the poor fella. So he had to sell this because it was a means of raising some cash to pay his own bills. And we managed to get everything we needed from this one guy, enough to build the whole car for less than the price of the basic kit from the NG factory, which is a very good starting point.
Well, yeah, you're very much ahead of the game there with having all the bits there at a much lower cost. How did the build go together on that one?
Yeah, the build went well, and then considering this was the first kit car I built, it was a real revelation. Not playing, I mean, I built loads of MGBs and stuff, and you're always fighting rust and fighting oil leaks and dirty, grimy, slimy stuff. And all of a sudden, everything's new and clean, and it bolts together. And it was an absolute revelation, and it changed me completely away from working with old cars to want to build more kit cars. Uh, and it went together in about 3 months, and it proved to be excellent fun to drive. It was a bit small for me, I must say, because my eye line was at the top of the windscreen, but it wasn't for me anyway. The car was actually from a friend Laurie, and it fitted him perfectly. And he ran it for about 3 years, I think.
The other thing that for sort of younger people involved or people new to kit cars, the registration process back there is a little different to the IVA system we have nowadays, isn't it?
It was so easy. All you had to do was put the thing together, make sure you got a logbook with the donor car, and then just transfer those number plates onto the new one, down the MOT station, and away you went. It was so easy. Of course, then when IVA testing came in, which I still believe is a good thing because it improved the quality of the industry dramatically. Um, then you had to jump through all kinds of hurdles to try and get the car registered, and a lot of the designs that were um, basic designs.
Maybe questionable designs.
Yeah, I think that's a kind description. Yeah, they just all disappeared overnight because they couldn't. So I didn't stand a chance of getting them through an IVA test. So all the vague engineering and the bits hanging out all over the place. Everybody had to up their game to do it, which is it's a good thing. It does mean it's much harder to do, and one of my latest builds, I just built another NGTC V8 for myself. Unfortunately, it had been correctly registered in 1985 as an NGTC V8. So I didn't have to go through an IVA test to put it back on the road. I could rebuild it. I could change anything I wanted to. But those 1930s designs, there's loads of sharp edges and bits sticking out all over the place. And to try and get it through looking like an original 30s car would be almost impossible nowadays.
There must be some probably quite incredible highs and lows of the kits you've come across in that time.
Yeah, I mean the ones that stick out. I'll go with the highs first. Let's start with some good news because there's some lovely ones. The I think the easiest kit I've ever built was a Westfield 7 with a 1300 Crossflow Ford on twin 40 Webers. Um, Everything fitted easily. Every bracket, nut, bolt, washer you could ever want was available from the factory, so you didn't have to invent anything. The wiring loom just plugged in, and it was 14 days, start to finish, the whole car as a build. And it was just a revelation. The industry at large, even nowadays, could learn so much from the standard that Westfield were producing. This was in about 1992, 93, something like that. And it was an absolute joy. Again, a bit tiny for me when it was finished. I could test drive it in bare feet. I couldn't get my feet on the pedals with shoes on. Um, but yeah, it was lovely. And that little 1300 Crossflow, nowadays everybody wants to put 2 litre Z-Tex or turbocharged MX5 engines in it. For road use, that little 1300 Crossflow was a beautiful balance of power, performance, weight, and durability because it was a tough little thing. And you could drive it almost full throttle most of the time and really loon about in it. It was great fun.
So the Westfield's probably the high that jumped out of you. I'm going to prod you because there's got to be some horror stories there that kits you just looked at and went, "Oh my, where do we start? How do I break this to the customer, etc., etc."
Yeah, there's been quite a few. I've managed to get through a lot of them. Now that's not blowing my own trumpet. That's just with persistence and patient customers. But there was, I think you might remember the old the Banham Audi TT lookalike based on a Mini Metro, and some poor unfortunate soul fell for the advertising and bought the kit, and he'd had it for about a year, and then eventually brought it to me to see if I could finish it for him.
Oh,
And I was aware of them. I hadn't had the detailed look before this guy turned up with his car. But after I'd had it in the workshop 2 or 3 days, I had to get him to come over and sit him down quietly in the corner and explain the facts to him that this thing was just awful. And even if I could build it to the best of my abilities, I wouldn't have want to put my name to it because it was never going to look right and it was never going to work properly. There's other ones as well, things like the Robin Hood cage, the Kaig.
Uh,
Oh, have a look for the pictures of that.
I,
That's a
I,
real turkey and a half.
I have to put my hands up. I owned one for a very short period of time, and I probably came to the rapidly to the same conclusion that you did. It was for those of you who aren't aware, it was trying to be like a smart car built out of a Metro. It looked like a roll cage with A series bits hanging off it. Is that sort of unfair?
That's a very fair description and stylistically challenged from every single angle. Now, I understand where he was coming from because the guy's name was Richard, I think he used to own Robin Hood. I can't remember his
Uh,
surname.
Richard Stewart.
That's it, yes. He was a very clever guy and he was getting into big production numbers by using CNC tube bending, which was at the time very, very cutting edge stuff. And with that Robin Hood cage, he tried to make it so that it was literally one length of tube. So the engineering principles behind it were good, but somebody needed to sit him down and say, okay, you do the chassis, I'll do the bodywork, and give somebody else a chance to have some input on it because I don't think they sold very many, fortunately. But yeah, they were fun. But can I go back just to Westfield just a moment? Because one of the real coincidences there, one of the other lovely cars I built was a Chesil,
Oh, okay.
because the quality on that was superb. And now to have them under the same roof, I think their potential they have, with the two really, really good quality products, is to really move forward with that. I think they can go a long way together.
Once you've done all these builds and you're quite well into it, um, you suddenly ended up getting involved in designing and building your own car. How did that come about?
Yeah, that was a really weird starting point. I got a friend of mine, Tony, he's a computer engineer, very clever guy, but no mechanical experience at all. And a friend of his had a little recording studio in his back garden. And we were in there one night playing some music, drinking beer, and I was trying to explain the theory of triangulation to him. And I started scratching pictures on the wall with an old nail about how you should try and get all the loads to come up into the roof area. And and we got a bit more drunk, and then all went home. And the following day, went back in there, looked at these scratchings on the wall, and thought, that looks interesting. And then and then there was minis everywhere. And this is mid 80s, late 80s, about 87, 88. And you could pick a mini up for 25 quid, no problem at all. So the thought of putting a mini engine in the middle of effectively a roll cage on wheels to give it the right weight balance, and then making a real strong frame, would then give you access to more or less any kind of motorsport you wanted, because it was light, it was agile, the parts were cheap, you had really good traction. Because it was a roll cage, there wasn't the body panels were literally flat aluminium sheets, well riveted onto the roll cage. So it was inherently a very strong structure. I made the first prototype, took it to Castle Combe down in Wiltshire, not a million miles away from you.
No,
And for the Kit Car Action Day. I don't know if you remember those all those years ago.
you've just opened the file right at the back of my head. We are going back a long way there, aren't we?
But I'm amazed there weren't more of them, because you're buying a car, a kit car. It's a mobile thing. It needs to work. Looking at it in a show hall is not really the right place to see it. Looking at it on a track and being able to pay £2 to go for a ride for 4 or 5 laps, that's how you sell cars. So we took this little Mosquito down there, and did 3 or 4 laps in it. And then suddenly realised we were going a lot faster than some of the 7 replicas, and driving past some of the Cobras, and embarrassing quite a few people, even though we only had drum brakes on the front and a standard 1275 GT engine. So it was quite an eye opener. We did that for about 3 years. I think we went down to the action days. And then word spread. There was about 12 chassis made in total, I think. It was a lovely project, but because there was so much hand fabrication, this is before the days of laser cutting, before the real days of CNC tube bending. So everything was made with a plumber's hydraulic pipe bender, a hacksaw, and a file. So it was extremely labour intensive. So there was no profit in it. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I would do it again. I wouldn't change it. But yeah, it was hard work. and that, as well as trying to be a manufacturer, salesman, businessman, designer, all the things you have to do to market a kit car. There's a lot of work there.
What happened to the Mosquito project in the end? Is it something you still own and have the jigs and molds for?
Well, yes, I actually bought one back about 2 years ago. Would you believe? That had been languishing in the garage for years and years and years, and I've sold that one on again. I've done a few bits and pieces to it and sold it on to a guy who's now going to use it for auto testing. So again fulfills its need for doing a little bit of motorsport. Um, I would have liked to have gone further with it. And about 2 years after we stopped making it, because we finished them in about 92, 93, something like that. In about 95, 96, MG's bought out the MGF, which would have been the absolute perfect donor because it's already been engined. It's already got decent brakes. It's already designed to be a sports car. So if that had been around as a donor car when I started doing the Mosquitoes, things would have been very, very different. It would have been much less fabrication. It would have been a much faster car. And I have toyed with the idea on many occasions of jumping back into the fire again, but I think the fire's gone out of me now to a certain degree. I haven't got the energy to go back and try and redesign.
So moving on a little bit, you've had all these builds that you've been involved with or completed from either start to finish. Any funny stories you can bring us of oddball manufacturers, customers, cars? A little bit of a chuckle for us.
Oddball one. One of the early customers for one of my little Mosquitoes was Lieutenant Colonel Terry Lees of the Territorial Army Reserves. And he wanted to make one of my little Mosquitoes into a light assault vehicle with big chunky tyres. He even put the machine gun mount on the roof so you could stand up on the passenger side and he could drive it down the high street and have his imitation machine gun pointing at people. It was hilarious. It was great fun when he did it. But when he first mentioned it to me, I wasn't sure where he was going with it. So yeah, that would be one. There's been so many cars. I think I mentioned the Adams Roadsters.
Yes. Yeah.
And I've built 4 of those now, and they're a glorious machine. They had a lot of work, I will say. It wasn't a very well developed kit. But I actually got a phone call completely out of the blue about 4 years ago from Dennis Adams, which was I thought somebody was pulling my leg to start with. But I'd done a report on the build when I was doing Kit Car magazine, and somebody had shown it to him. And he thought, no, I want to phone and have a chat. And that was one of those real starstruck moments where I'm sitting there thinking, this is Dennis Adams, the car designer. And I've built one of his kits and he wants to talk to me. It was a really strange experience. But what a lovely guy. He was very, very understanding of all the things. I'd made a few criticisms of the car, but he was aware of them and he wasn't precious about it and trying to defend everything. Because one of the last ones I built, they tried to do a long wheelbase version, a 4-seater. And my customer had bought it as a pretty awful derelict that somebody had tried to build 30 years ago. But when they did the body conversion, they lengthened the wings, but as sort of prototypes. They never intended it for production on this one, and they'd used bits of steel rod and bits of wood and loads of filler. And then my customer found this car thinking it was going to be okay. We'll just put it back together again. And I ended up having to make a complete new set of body molds from these front prototype panels. So again, that turned into a very involved project, but a lovely car when it was done, and it's still around down in Brighton. Guys still using it as far as I know. So yeah, it was good fun.
So you touched on the next area I wanted to talk about, because 130 builds in the past, you've had your own car that you've designed, manufactured and sold. What else is there to do? Become a Kit Car magazine editor. How did that all come about?
That was a really weird one. I don't know if you've been aware of a motoring journalist called Ian Eyre.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, well, I've known Ian for many, many years, probably about 40 years. And he also knew Rob Hawkins, who used to be the editor of Kit Car magazine. After, his name's gone. Den Tanner, sorry. When Den Tanner finally gave up, Den had an awful ride for the last few years. I won't go into any details at all because it's his own personal business. But when he eventually sold Kit Car magazine on, Rob Hawkins took it on as the editor and did a fabulous job with it. But he then after about 4 years, he wanted to move on to pastures new, and they didn't know of anybody. So Rob spoke to Ian. Ian said, "I'll have a word with Chris and see if he'll do it." Now, I've never done magazine editing before. I've done some articles. I used to do quite a lot for Witch Kit magazine, but never done any editing work. And then Ian put my name in the fray and some money was offered. And I thought, well, okay, I'll give it a try. I know the subject, so that wasn't the problem. It was the technical aspect. That was a very steep learning curve, trying to work out how to compile a magazine, how to find articles. You think they're everywhere, but oh no, there's an awful lot of schlepping up and down the country. You've been there, you know what it's like. There's a lot of legwork and a lot of late nights writing stories and trying to find stuff. So fascinating period of my life as well, because I did it for about 3 years, I think, in total. And while I was doing the magazine, I was also trying to keep my workshop going here. Um, and I ended up having a heart attack at the end of it because of the pressure. So that sort of put a limit on it. And it's one of those moments when you're laying in a hospital bed thinking, yeah, it was good fun, but where did I go with this? So yeah, it makes you reassess where you're going. And now, fortunately, all those problems have gone away, and I'm back doing the projects I want to do rather than trying to earn money all the time because I'm partly retired. And I'm back and I'm really enjoying the design and the creative process again. I can do it at my own speed. I'm not trying to make somebody else's vision come to life. This is me now, it's my cars, and I'm doing it because I want to. And that's a lovely, refreshing place to be.
Well, we've covered the various bits of your career there, Chris, and I found it really interesting, enlightening, and quite funny in some points as well. I've got a few quick fire questions for you, and then we'll find out what you've got going on at the moment. So, of all the kits you've come across, what one should have succeeded but didn't?
Right, I'm actually going to go for two here because there's two that are for completely different reasons. Brian Hales with his DNA 250, the Ferrari 250 GTO replica on the BMW Z3. I came across that while I was doing Kit Car magazine, and what an outstanding piece of work. It really was beautifully finished. All his projects are good quality, but that one really stood out. And it should have gone a very long way, but unfortunately the Ferrari lawyers got involved and they came over, gave him a cease and desist order, and he had to cut all the moulds up, which was such a shame because even personally, I would have loved to have built one of those just for myself because it's such a glorious car. Well, I won't go too much into detail because we're doing quickfire, but the other one that is the Vortex Phantom, or the Phantom GT, as it was called. It was a stylistically beautiful car. They only ever made a small number, but it was based on a Rover 827, which is a bit of a weird car to use as a base. But that Honda V6 that it had in it was a good engine. But I think people were still looking then for the Ford donor cars and stuff like that, which they knew how it all worked, rather than using British Leyland stuff. And the Rover 820s did have electrical problems and stuff. But again, a car that you can still get one nowadays. But it's the match of McLaren, styling wise. It's a really beautiful car.
It is. I will agree with that. It's one car that I think if you saw it in a general, like a breakfast meet or something like that, people would think it was a proper limited production car. No one would look at that and label it kit car because it, as you say, it's got that McLaren-esque about it. Beautiful car. I think you're absolutely spot on with that one. We've sort of touched this already. You got worst kit build. Obviously, you touched on the Bantams there. Any others that spring to mind?
I did have a brief flirtation with Auto Tunes with their Aristocat, and my expectations were very high because they sold so many of them. But when I actually came to build one, yeah, it didn't end well. Let's put it that way. I'm not going to go into too many details because they're still making them and they're still in business, and I don't want to end up in court. But we did end up parting company, not in the best of terms, and the customer wasn't that impressed either.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if there's any left with all the builds you've done. Which kit haven't you built that you'd love to build?
I think again, I go for that Vortex Phantom would be one that I would love to put one of those together, even to the point where if they decided to sell the project on, I'd be very keen to take the whole project on, because I think with a slightly different donor car underneath it, that there is huge potential there, absolutely huge, for selling almost completely built cars at a good price. Yeah, that will be a good one.
Couple of quick fire extras I've chucked in for you. GT40 or AC Cobra?
I love GT40s. I can't fit. I'm too tall. You have to be under. You have to be under 5'10" to get it. Even with the gurney hump on the door, you still the door comes across here and it just hits you on the side of the head. And Cobras I like. Well, maybe we'll touch on later. I'm building a DAX Cobra at the moment, but I've had to do a lot of modifications to it because it seems that everybody back in the 1950s was about 5'8" and about 10 stone. I'm neither of those, so I have to move everything around. And on the DAX, I've had to drop the floor pan. I've had to move the rear bulkhead backwards. I've had to change the pedal box just to get comfortable inside it. So if I had to choose between the two, I would choose the Cobra just because I can get in it.
Engine-wise, front, mid, or rear engined?
I would say mid-rear, because dynamically it's the best place for it. It's within the wheelbase. I've never really understood people's obsession with Porsche, because you've got it in the wrong place. I know you've engineered their way around it and they've made it work over the last 60 years, but the engine's still in the wrong place. You don't hang it right out over the back axle because we know what's going to happen. So yeah, for me, mid rear engine, so it's just on the rear axle line or just in front of it, gives you the very best balance between grip, performance, handling, everything that you need.
What have you got happening at the moment? Is where I'd like to head to sort of start to wrap things up. Is what cars have you got in your workshop, and what are you producing, and so on at the moment?
Well, my most recently finished one is an NGTC V8, which I finished about 18 months ago, and that again was built for me. It started off as a derelict kit which I found in a scrapyard up in Doncaster. Came up on eBay, and it gave me the opportunity. All the things when we built the first NG back in the 80s, there was loads of little bits which we thought that could be a little bit better, and it wasn't a criticism of the kit because it was still a good kit, but it just wasn't big enough for me. So now, because this one was correctly registered and didn't have to go through an IVA test, I've managed to move the front subframe forward 8 inches. I've managed to move the scuttle up by 5 inches. And I've made the car, the doors are 6 inches longer than the original ones. So I can fit inside this kit properly. And I've done 3,500 miles in it since I built it. And absolutely adore it. It's great fun. So that's the latest finished one. And I'm currently building a DAX. Everybody knows them as a Cobra. But the interest, it's the backstory that interests me as much as building the cars. If Carroll Shelby hadn't have been the success he was, and everybody knows the story was quite marginal, he could have easily fallen on his face because he had very little money and only 1 or 2 cars that he was spraying different colours all the time for each different press article to try and get people to think it was this great organisation. And I'm trying to make the car that AC cars would have made if Carroll Shelby wasn't the success he was. They knew they had a good chassis, they knew the body shape worked, and at exactly the same time, 1963, 64, the Rover V8 was being productionized for Rovers from the old Buick engine over in the States. And BRMs were doing a lot of the production conversion work for them. So it wouldn't have taken a lot of working out that if ACs, they couldn't use the old Bristol or the Ford Zodiac engine anymore because they were getting too long in the tooth. They would have put the Rover engine in what would have become the AC V8 rather than the Cobra. And that's the car I'm trying to make. So it would be the 1960s version of what ACs would have done if Carroll Shelby had fallen on his bum.
You're borderline resto mod there, aren't you?
Absolutely, yeah. It's trying to pick which bits are the right bits. This is going to sound a bit cruel, but I'm sick to death of blue, white stripes, side pipes, and Hannah Brown wheels. Everybody wants to do that, and you're thinking, It's a lovely shape car. You don't just have to make a copy. You can be a bit more individualistic than this, and you can change things around. It's not the holy grail that you have to make a 427 Cobra copy. So I wanted to take it completely left field and think, right, what can I do with it? So, and I'm hoping it will be finished this year. There's an awful lot of one-off stuff on it, so it's taken me a long time to do. And again, I can do it at my pace, so I don't have to rush, which is quite nice. But if I can get that out this year, there's going to be some people that are absolutely hate it. I know they will, because it's not blue with white stripes and side pipes. It can't be a Cobra. But there'll be others, hopefully, who will understand and they'll get it, and then I can get out and use it. And I've probably built in total 20 Cobras during the course of the years while I've been building cars. And I've built them with big blocks, small blocks. I've built one with a V12 Jag engine in it. But my favourite one was a DAX with a 4-litre Rover in it, with a nicely tuned 4-litre Rover, because the weight balance is right. You've taken that 600 kilos of cast iron boat anchor off the front axle and put a nice lightweight aluminium V8 in there. And when you get about 250 horsepower out of one of those, they are a joy to drive. You can drive it like a proper sports car, not just point it and squirt on straight bits. You can actually go around corners at tremendous speeds. So yeah, really nicely balanced car with the right engine.
Well, Chris, that has been really informative, really enjoyable, and we've had a few chuckles along the way, and I hope you've enjoyed it as well.
Yes, no, it's been quite interesting, and it makes me realise how long I've been doing this now. Perhaps I should try doing something else.
Well, perhaps we've stimulated you into yet another project, so that would be great, and hopefully you would come back to us and let us know if you do. So that's been absolutely great, Chris, and I hope you at home have also enjoyed it. We've had great fun making this, so we'd really appreciate it if you could do us a little favour and just click that subscribe button, because that makes so much difference to us as a channel here at 7 Spot. So keep well, and we'll see you next time.